When an arrogant bride-to-be decided to invite her fiancé's ex-partner to their extravagant wedding, she assumed it would be nothing more than a clever humiliation. But as she revealed her plan with a smug smile, one disturbing detail slipped out, something that would upend every last illusion of control and destroy the perfect wedding she had planned. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of second chances, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Daniel Wright first tasted the sting of hardship in the working-class neighborhood of Riverton, where every rusted mailbox and creaking porch told a story of struggle. Born into a modest home with peeling wallpaper and patched floors, he learned early on that opportunity rarely knocked unless you were ready to chase it down. As a child, he watched his parents juggle multiple jobs, working late into the night to afford rent on their cramped apartment. He remembered the glow of the single lamp in the living room, where his father pored over budget spreadsheets, and the determined look in his mother's eyes whenever she sorted piles of utility bills, trying to figure out which ones they could afford that month. That quiet desperation shaped Daniel. While other children might have been content with street games and weekend cartoons, Daniel immersed himself in books and volunteer work. His father's borrowed history texts became windows to a larger world, one that promised more than the dusty corners of Riverton. He excelled at his underfunded public school, absorbing everything from math to literature, determined to outrun the relentless cycle of poverty that had clung to his family for generations. Teachers noticed his drive. One counselor, seeing something bright in the teen's eyes, guided him towards scholarship opportunities. Daniel devoured test prep guides and academic competitions, fueled by an ambition that sometimes overshadowed his health and social life. At 17, he won a scholarship to a prestigious university, a near-miraculous feat in Riverton, opening a door he feared would forever remain locked. Setting foot on the university's manicured campus felt surreal. It was a world of pristine lawns, looming Gothic architecture, and wealth that manifested in ways Daniel had never seen. Sports cars, designer wardrobes, fraternities with deep ties to powerful alumni. He navigated it all with cautious wonder, uncertain if he truly belonged. Yet he refused to shrink. In classroom discussions, he offered carefully researched insights, determined to prove his worth. Though quiet in social circles, he blossomed whenever academic topics arose, earning respect from peers who initially judged him by his scuffed shoes and subdued demeanor. In his second year, he met Nancy Smith in a mandatory art history course. At first glance, she appeared as his opposite. Nancy was whimsical, a fervent dreamer who spilled her thoughts in bright colors across canvases. She had grown up in a stable, middle-class household in another city, far from Riverton's worn edges. Yet, behind her soft smiles, there was a glint of resilience. She nursed her own quiet burdens, a sister's chronic illness that haunted her childhood, an unsupportive relative who doubted her artistic path. Nancy found in Daniel a certain gravity she admired. When he spoke about bridging economic gaps in society or described his unwavering aspirations for bettering the world, she felt an unexpected kinship. It was as if his logic and her creativity formed two halves of a bigger picture. They discovered their shared sense of purpose during late-night campus strolls. Nancy often teased Daniel for his relentless seriousness, painting swirl patterns on his notebooks to coax a little laughter out of him. He, in turn, encouraged her to refine her art with discipline, pointing out that her raw talent deserved structure, strategy, something she had never quite embraced. These conversations blossomed into affection. Over coffee in the student union, they revealed their biggest fears. His of returning to Riverton in defeat, hers of never finding her own voice in a sea of more flamboyant artists. They vowed to encourage each other, forging a partnership that balanced ambition with inspiration. Soon, they fell in love. Their relationship thrived for a time, full of spontaneous museum trips and all-night brainstorming sessions. Yet, as graduation loomed, Daniel's obsession with success intensified. In the final semester, he frequented networking events, pitched startup ideas to potential investors, and spent sleepless nights drafting business proposals. Nancy tried to cheer him on, but their once exhilarating banter turned strained. She felt his warmth receding. Where there had been spontaneous walks and shared secrets, now phone calls were hurried, dinners postponed. The day of their graduation ceremony came, bright with promise, but also laced with tension. Daniel, having secured early funding for his new tech startup, Wright Innovations, bustled about, shaking hands with future mentors. Nancy, overshadowed by the hustle, struggled to share her own joyous news. A local gallery wanted to feature her paintings. As they parted ways to greet family and friends, the distance between them felt more than physical. She saw him across the courtyard, engrossed in conversation with a wealthy alumnus. She waited for him to glance back, to smile in that comforting way. He did not. They tried, haltingly, to stay connected after graduation. Nancy moved to a small studio apartment downtown, painting feverishly for her upcoming exhibit. Daniel rented a cheaper unit near the city's tech district, funneling every spare dollar into Wright Innovations. His days blurred into pitch meetings, software prototypes, and hiring interns. He barely slept. Nancy visited him once with homemade soup, worried about his gaunt face, but found him absorbed in emails, phone pressed to his ear. She left quietly after half an hour of being overlooked, hugging the soup container to her chest. Eventually, he realized the toll his ambition was exacting, but not before Nancy decided she'd had enough. She ended things one somber afternoon, tears streaming as she told him that love shouldn't feel like a footnote in his pursuit of an empire. She said she hoped he'd fulfill his dreams, but that she couldn't stand by, waiting to be acknowledged. He listened in stunned silence, wanting to protest, but found no words that could promise a change in his approach. With a final tearful goodbye, she left. He threw himself further into work, telling himself heartbreak was a fair price to pay for success. Nancy discovered her pregnancy a few weeks later, alone in her tiny apartment, trembling at the test result. Triplet. She nearly dropped the stick in shock. 3 children, all at once. She debated telling Daniel, but fear rooted her to the spot. She knew how relentlessly he pursued his ambitions, how every hour was a stepping stone. Would he see them as obstacles or blessings? Maybe he'd resent her for interfering with his unstoppable trajectory. Part of her burned with anger. He was the father, after all. But the stronger part, the part that still loved him despite everything, didn't want him to be burdened with a choice he wasn't ready to make. So she quietly packed her belongings, found a cheaper spot in a different neighborhood, and resolved to navigate motherhood on her own. Meanwhile, Daniel soared to professional heights. Investors recognized his unwavering focus. Wright Innovations began developing cutting-edge software that promised to revolutionize data analytics. He hired a small team, worked from a cramped loft, and lived off takeout. Business articles lauded his improbable rise. Local startup founder beats the odds. He accepted magazine interviews, proud to claim he had triumphed over a tough childhood. His parents beamed with pride, pinned newspaper clippings to their fridge in Riverton. In those glowing write-ups, not a single mention of Nancy existed. The years flashed by in a swirl of new offices, expansions, and eventually multi-million-dollar valuations. Daniel, now in his early 30s, wore tailored suits, gave keynote speeches at tech conferences, and shook hands with high-level investors from across the globe. He visited Riverton occasionally to support community education, donating computers to the local library. Yet, in quiet moments, he sometimes wondered how Nancy was doing. He searched for her online once, found only a few references to local art shows, and decided not to reach out. He told himself that chapter was closed, that they were better off apart. Nancy's life, meanwhile, became a tapestry of exhaustion and unyielding love. She brought 3 children into the world alone, learning the intricacies of mothering triplets through trial and error. Her nights blurred with diaper changes, feedings, and constant worry about finances. Early on, her family offered sporadic help, but she resisted leaning on them too heavily, determined to carve her own path. Somehow, she juggled painting commissions in stolen bursts of time, occasionally selling a piece for enough to cover groceries. Although it was grueling, each child's laughter reminded her she had made the right choice. The children, 2 boys, 1 girl, grew with curious eyes and boundless energy. Nancy avoided mentioning their father, at least until they started asking questions. She answered carefully, explaining that sometimes life took parents down different roads. Deep inside, she wrestled with guilt for denying them a relationship with Daniel, but also fear that he might reject them entirely if she told him. So she pressed forward, fueling her quiet artistry with the swirl of emotions inside her. Wright innovations blossomed. Daniel's name became synonymous with tech success stories, a living example of upward mobility. He moved into an upscale condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and an impressive view of the city skyline. That was where he hosted exclusive investor dinners, forging alliances that boosted him further. After a major product launch, his net worth skyrocketed. Magazines photographed him by sleek cars, describing him as a self-made millionaire who overcame all odds. Publicly, he was confident, unstoppable. Privately, he carried an ache for something he couldn't name. At one lavish networking event, he met Victoria. She was an heiress from a wealthy family, her father a real estate mogul. Victoria exuded poise, strolling through the crowd with the surety of someone who had never known financial struggle. She found Daniel's story intriguing. This scrappy tech genius from a poor neighborhood, now sought by top corporations. They talked about business expansions, philanthropic endeavors, and the synergy between her family's real estate empire and his data solutions. Impressed, Victoria saw Daniel not just as a partner for future deals, but as a potential partner in life. Initially, Daniel was flattered by Victoria's attention. She introduced him to high society events he once believed existed only on television: charity galas, polo matches, country club dinners. Surrounded by shining cutlery and stiff-collared men, Daniel found himself acting the part of a refined entrepreneur, carefully measuring each word. Victoria guided him through the nuances, praising his intelligence whenever he navigated a complex conversation with her father's associates. Over time, she teased that they should unite their resources on both personal and professional fronts. Daniel, though not deeply smitten, recognized the strategic advantage and found her confidence alluring. Their relationship progressed swiftly. Within a year, she suggested marriage. Daniel, now in his mid-30s, felt a twinge of uncertainty. Something about wedding vows seemed heavier than all the business deals he'd ever signed. Yet Victoria's unwavering support for his expansions, her father's open doors to prime real estate, and the glimmer of acceptance from the top echelons of society proved enticing. He quieted the small voice inside him that whispered about genuine intimacy, about love that didn't revolve around net worth or social standing. He told himself Victoria understood him. Her family's wealth had come with its own pressures, and she had once confided that she admired his grit. So, he acquiesced to her suggestions. A ring was selected. A high-profile wedding was planned. News of Daniel's engagement spread quickly among the city's elite. One tabloid described them as a power couple, predicting their union would open new frontiers in tech meets real estate synergy. Daniel's parents were content for him, though they admitted being slightly intimidated by Victoria's flamboyant lifestyle. They said little, mindful that Daniel rarely let his personal life overshadow his professional path. Meanwhile, Victoria reveled in the spotlight, determined to create a wedding the media would talk about for months. She planned for a grand affair at a historic mansion outside the city, with a guest list boasting celebrities, CEOs, and politicians. Amid the swirl of tastings, dress fittings, and negotiations over flower arrangements, Victoria's gaze hardened on one final flourish she wanted to orchestrate: the presence of Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Nancy Smith. Over brunch with her close friend, Victoria mentioned that Daniel had been involved with an artist back in college. A friend of a friend recalled Nancy's name, describing her as a bohemian type with rumored ties to local galleries. Victoria's curiosity piqued. She pictured a quiet, unassuming woman who might look out of place among the opulence. Wouldn't it be something, she mused, if Nancy showed up just to see how far Daniel had come? A malicious spark lit within Victoria as she toyed with the idea. She would have Nancy attend, seat her among guests who would whisper and judge, ensuring Nancy felt overshadowed by the grand spectacle. If Nancy was truly the timid ex-Victoria imagined, she might flee humiliated, verifying that Daniel had traded up. In a passing moment, she asked Daniel about the old flame. He replied matter-of-factly that he hadn't spoken to Nancy in years. He described her as talented but overshadowed in his mind by the unstoppable force that was Wright Innovations. He never guessed Victoria's hidden intention, to locate Nancy and invite her as a twisted entertainment. Finding Nancy wasn't too hard once Victoria asked a few quiet questions among local art circles. Nancy had managed to hold small exhibitions, and her name occasionally popped up in monthly art newsletters. Victoria sent a formal invitation, etched in gold, to the address she obtained. She never told Daniel. She intended to make it a surprise on the wedding day, a private pleasure to watch Nancy tremble under the combined weight of wealth and status. The note read, "We cordially invite you to celebrate the union of Daniel Wright and Victoria DuPont. Kindly join us for an evening of elegance and joy." Nancy's heart skipped a beat when she saw the names. She read it over a few times, shock swirling in her mind. After so many years, she wondered why on earth Daniel's fiancé would want her there. Nancy's life at that point revolved around her children, 3 bright, spirited kids with Daniel's signature resolve. They were almost 10 now, each with distinctive personalities shaped by Nancy's unwavering love. She'd spent the last decade balancing motherhood with her art, cobbling together commissions to keep the family afloat. The children asked about their father occasionally, especially as they saw friends with dads at school events. Nancy gave them gentle, neutral answers. She stifled her own sadness, hoping to shield them from bitterness or disappointment. Her relationship with Daniel had become a memory she rarely revisited, until that ornate invitation pulled it back to center stage. Why invite her, she wondered, unless it was some kind of cruelty? She considered ignoring it, but a new thought struck her. Daniel had never known about his children. For nearly a decade, she had wrestled with guilt over that decision, especially as the kids grew older. Lately, they'd asked more pointed questions about their father, and her vague replies felt increasingly insufficient. If Daniel was about to marry, perhaps he deserved to know the truth before forging a new life. She wrestled with the dread of seeing him again after so long, of stepping into a lavish crowd, but her children's curiosity won out. Slowly, Nancy made arrangements. She borrowed a simple yet elegant dress from an older friend, saved enough to hire a babysitter for the wedding day, and decided she would appear on that carefully manicured lawn to drop a truth bomb no one expected. She told her children, with quiet gravity, "I'll meet your father. He might want to see you after that." They nodded, wide-eyed, understanding that a shift in their little world might be coming. She left them in the care of a close neighbor that weekend, anxious but resolved. On the day of the wedding, the historic mansion glittered in the late afternoon sun. Rows of white chairs fanned out across the lawn, surrounding a flower-strewn aisle. Paparazzi lurked at the entrance gates, hoping to snap photos of the millionaire groom and his influential bride. Guests arrived in tuxedos and designer gowns, whisked by valet from expensive cars. Staff circulated trays of champagne, the murmur of small talk underscoring the opulence. White doves cooed in cages near the back, ready to be released at the climactic moment, as Victoria had insisted on a theatrical flourish. Daniel paced inside a private room, adjusting his cufflinks, his hair carefully styled. He had an unsettled feeling, though he chalked it up to wedding jitters. The staff assured him everything was in place, The floral arches, the string quartet, the sumptuous buffet. He tried to quell the uneasy twinge at the back of his mind, reminding himself that he had chosen this path. Meanwhile, Victoria glided through a suite upstairs, receiving last-minute touches to her elaborate dress. A few close confidants hovered around her, praising her radiance, oblivious to the simmering malice that had inspired the clandestine invitation. As time ticked closer to the ceremony, a sly grin tugged at Victoria's lips. She couldn't wait to see Nancy's reaction. Outside, guests settled into their seats, flipping through glossy programs that recounted Daniel's philanthropic achievements and Victoria's family legacy. A hush fell as the string quartet began a soft prelude. Then, just as the officiant signaled for the ceremony to begin, a new presence stepped onto the lawn. Nancy Smith, in a simple blue dress that contrasted sharply with the glitzy attire around her, stood at the edge of the rows. Heads turned, eyebrows lifted. She clutched a small handbag, posture stiff with nerve. The hush gave way to whispers. No one recognized her from the social pages. Some speculated she was an uninvited relative or an old friend from the groom's less illustrious past. Victoria, peeking from a window, spotted Nancy at once. Her heart pounded with triumphant glee. She motioned for one of the wedding planners to seat Nancy, expecting her to sink in discomfort among a crowd of wealthy strangers. But Nancy, bracing herself, did something else entirely. She marched closer to the front, scanning for Daniel. A few uniformed staff members politely tried to halt her, but she pressed forward. In that moment, Daniel stepped out onto the lawn, poised at the altar, adjusting his collar. His gaze swept across the assembled guests, landing on her. The color drained from his face. He recognized Nancy instantly, though older, more refined in a quiet way. 100 memories flitted through his mind, university hallways, her laughter, the smell of turpentine from her painting sessions. Why was she here? He felt a jolt of confusion, embarrassment, and something akin to guilt. Next to him, the officiant cleared his throat, as if to start the ceremony. But Daniel's attention was locked on Nancy, who continued her determined approach. Victoria emerged from the mansion's archway, radiant in a custom gown, accompanied by an orchestral swell that was meant to punctuate her grand entrance. She noticed Daniel's stunned expression, following his line of sight until she too locked eyes on Nancy's figure. The hush escalated to a near silence, guests craning their necks to see the drama unfolding. Nancy's heart thundered. She felt every muscle tighten with the weight of a decade's worth of secret. She had planned to speak to Daniel privately, but seeing him about to exchange vows propelled her forward. Standing a few steps away from the altar, Nancy lifted her chin. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling yet resolute, "I'm sorry to do this now, but I need to speak with you." A ripple of scandalized whispers spread among the crowd. Victoria's cheeks flushed with anger. This was not the meek ex she had envisioned. Daniel, swallowing a surge of shock, found his voice. "Nancy," he managed, eyes darting to the guests, "what on earth is this?" She exhaled. "It's about your children. The triplets. They're yours." Chaos erupted. Several guests rose from their seats, some leaning forward in open-mouthed surprise. Victoria, furious, stomped down the aisle, ignoring the train of her gown that snagged on a chair. "What is this nonsense?" she hissed at Nancy, but her volume carried to half the audience. Nancy trembled but held her ground. "I'm not here to ruin your wedding," she began, only to be cut off by Victoria's sharp retort. "You must be delusional," Victoria snapped. "Daniel would never father your children without knowing." Daniel's mind reeled. He looked at Nancy, searching her eyes for any sign of deception or drama. Her pained expression told him this was no prank. "Triplets," he repeated, still numb. She nodded. "They're 10 years old, Daniel. I never told you because I thought, well, you were so focused on success. And I was afraid." Her voice cracked, tears threatening. "But they deserve to know their father." Victoria, white with rage, slapped Daniel across the face. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. The officiant flinched. Several cameras clicked, capturing the moment. "You lied to me," Victoria accused, voice trembling with fury. "All these years you've hidden some woman and children? Everyone's going to think I'm a laughingstock." Daniel stumbled back, a red mark blossoming on his cheek. What? This is new to me." He tried to protest, but she was beyond listening. She threw her bouquet at him, the flowers scattering on the grass, then spun on her heel and stormed away from the altar, her grand train trailing behind. Gasps filled the air as more than one guest rose to chase after her or to whisper excitedly among themselves. In that moment, Daniel's meticulously curated life collapsed. He saw the pity and shock on the faces of the wealthy crowd, realized the wedding was effectively ruined, and felt an odd mixture of shame and longing for the simpler days when Nancy and he had huddled over coffee, dreaming of the future. He tried to approach her, but she looked ready to flee. The children, he had children? The magnitude hammered at him, overshadowing even the spectacle of wedding guests in disarray. Someone in the crowd coughed. The officiant, obviously thrown, closed his book with trembling hands. A hush enveloped the gathering. Daniel, voice cracking, said, "Nancy, please talk to me." She met his eyes, tears glistening. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I had to show you. They deserve to know who their father is." With that, the wedding officially collapsed. Victoria never returned from the mansion. Staff hurried to salvage food and decor. Some guests milled around awkwardly, uncertain whether to offer condolences or slip away quietly. Paparazzi, smelling blood in the water, snapped more photos from behind the gates. Rumors would spread like wildfire in social media, ensuring the fiasco made the tabloids by morning. Daniel, left standing in the ruins of his event, realized everything he'd meticulously built was no longer under his control. Nancy fled the scene shortly after, heart pounding. She left behind a business card with her contact info, given to Daniel in a brief, trembling exchange. "Call me if you want to meet them," she said in a raw whisper. Then, turning away from the bedlam, she rushed to her car. She wept on the drive back, torn between guilt for humiliating him so publicly and relief for finally breaking the silence. Back at the mansion, Daniel found himself confronted by furious relatives of Victoria, demanding explanations. He gave none, numb with shock. Eventually, the crowd disbanded, the wedding cancelled in every sense of the word. He retreated to his penthouse, ignoring frantic calls from PR agents and investors. Slumped in a designer armchair, still in his wedding suit, he stared at the city lights, mind reeling with the revelation that he was a father, of triplets, no less. In the following days, the press latched onto the fiasco. Headlines screamed about "Jilted Bride Walks Out on Tech Mogul" and "Secret Children Exposed." Wright Innovations took a PR hit, as rumors suggested Daniel had a scandalous personal life. Victoria, consumed by rage, demanded he sign legal documents severing ties they had planned. She also threatened to cause him professional harm through her father's connections, calling him a liar. Daniel tried to reason with her, explaining he never knew about the children, but she refused to listen. The shock to her pride was too great. During that swirl of negative press, Daniel's mind kept circling back to the truth he couldn't ignore. He had a family out there. He studied Nancy's business card on his kitchen counter, the edges worn from his anxious grip. Should he call? Should he let it be? The rational side of him, so proficient at damage control, suggested he quell the scandal quickly, maybe meet Nancy quietly, ensure the children were well cared for, then arrange something discreet. But the father in him, newfound and uncertain, wondered if he deserved a chance to know them, to see if he could be more than a rumored figure in their lives. He reached out one late evening, phone trembling in his hand. Nancy's cautious voice on the other end stirred memories of simpler times. "Daniel," she said quietly, "this is unexpected." He swallowed. "I need to see them," he managed. "If that's okay. I want to know them. I want to do right by them." Silence stretched. Then a sigh. "They're my world," she said. "I'll need to talk to them, prepare them. They know who you are, but this can't be rushed." He nodded, tears welling. "Yes, of course. I understand." Their first face-to-face after the wedding debacle occurred in a small cafe far from the city center, chosen for its privacy. Daniel arrived early, nerves coiled. Nancy entered, scanning for cameras. She took a seat, gripping a mug of tea. They sat in awkward silence until he said, "I'm sorry for everything. All the heartbreak, the wedding fiasco, the publicity." She regarded him, eyes flicking across his features, which looked older, more worn. "I'm sorry too," she replied. "But it was time." They spoke for 2 hours, carefully unraveling a decade's worth of misunderstandings. She recounted her terror upon learning she was pregnant with triplets, her choice to shield him from the news because she feared his reaction, and his possible resentment. He, in turn, admitted that losing her had been the price he had paid for an all-consuming ambition. They both acknowledged that had they tried to co-parent then, it might have ended in uglier conflict. The children, she explained, were healthy, bright, and curious. She showed him pictures on her phone. 3 toothy grins, a row of small medals from a school science fair, a painting they'd done together for a local competition. Daniel's throat tightened. This was real. He had missed so many birthdays, first words, steps, lost teeth, proud achievements. He asked if the kids wanted to meet him. Nancy said yes, but that they were also scared. "They've built a life without you, Daniel. Don't barge in demanding fatherly rights. Earn their trust gently." Her words stung but rang with truth. He nodded, promising to tread carefully. They arranged a casual meeting in a park the next weekend, a neutral place where the kids could see him without feeling cornered. Nancy insisted on being there, to provide them comfort. He accepted, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. That Sunday dawned bright and breezy. Daniel wore a simple sweater and jeans, discarding the suits that had become his uniform. Nancy arrived with the triplets in tow, and Daniel's breath caught. They were so similar yet distinct. He could see traces of Nancy's artistry in one child's watchful expression, a flicker of his own steely determination in another's stance, the third's quick scanning of the surroundings. Nancy introduced them softly, each by name. They stared at Daniel with wide-eyed curiosity. He crouched to greet them at eye level, voice trembling with sincerity. "Hi," he said. "I'm Daniel. I'm your dad." They didn't respond immediately, uncertain how to process a man who was both a stranger and a missing puzzle piece. Nancy urged them to say hello, and they did, shyly, each grappling with a swirl of emotions: excitement, fear, resentment. Over an hour, they walked through the park's trails, feeding ducks in the pond. Daniel tried to lighten the mood with small jokes, but mostly he found himself listening, learning about their school, their favorite shows, the board games they played. He realized how alien fatherhood felt, yet how desperately he wanted to embrace it. The children remained wary, but by the end they agreed to meet again. Meanwhile, Daniel's professional life teetered from the wedding fiasco. Investors worried about negative press. Victoria's father cut potential deals, calling Daniel irresponsible. A portion of the media cast him as a moral hypocrite, ignoring the nuance that he'd never known about the kid. Daniel spent hours each night in damage control mode, issuing statements that he was rebuilding personal ties. Some sympathized, recognizing that he'd been blindsided. But others saw only scandal. The stress weighed heavily, old nightmares of returning to poverty rearing up. Yet, for the first time since college, he found himself missing business calls, pushing back on all-night coding sessions. He wanted to be present for the children. They were 10 years old. He had already missed so much. Over the next few months, Daniel embarked on a slow, humbling journey to earn their trust. He visited Nancy's modest home, sitting among the swirl of crayons and art supplies. She watched him read stories, help with homework, and try to connect. The kids opened up bit by bit, telling him about their daily joys and struggles. He discovered one child loved computers, delighting in building mini electronic kits, maybe taking after him. Another had a knack for sketching animals, clearly Nancy's influence. The third was a daydreamer, mixing curiosity for math with a love of music. Each new detail filled Daniel with pride and a twinge of sadness for the years lost. Nancy, cautious, maintained boundaries. She insisted he respect their routines, not show up unannounced. She accompanied them on outings until she felt confident Daniel understood their anxieties. Over time, the children's wariness gave way to cautious affection. They realized he wasn't just the man from tabloids but a father eager to learn their favorite ice cream flavors or watch them at soccer practice. They teased him for not knowing the rules, but behind it, he sensed budding acceptance. In parallel, Nancy's painting found renewed vigor. Freed from the secrecy, she channeled the swirl of emotions into new canvases, portraits of silhouettes that hinted at intangible connections. She sold a few pieces in a local gallery, garnering modest acclaim. Sometimes Daniel lingered at her exhibits, blending into the crowd, marveling at her talent. They found themselves conversing in quieter tones, remembering the campus nights that once bound them. Yet they remained careful. They had changed, grown older. The closeness was now that of co-parents, united by the children. The tabloids, eventually bored with the wedding meltdown, shifted focus to other scandals. Daniel's name receded from sensational headlines. A few loyal investors stayed by his side, trusting that Wright innovations could weather the controversy. Realizing the precariousness of chasing the next big expansion, Daniel restructured the company's approach, focusing on sustainable growth. He spent fewer hours at the office, delegating tasks to a capable management team. For the first time, he valued a sense of balance. Late nights were no longer about coding. They were about finishing a call with the kids or listening to them chatter about their day. Occasionally, Victoria reappeared in the social columns, still furious. Rumors suggested she aimed to sabotage Daniel's business relationships, brand him as a cunning manipulator. But her efforts lost momentum when it became clear Daniel hadn't hidden Nancy or the children knowingly. People saw how he was trying to make amends, which softened public perception. Even so, the fiasco had hammered home that not everything was about corporate glory or public admiration. Daniel realized his fatherhood was a far bigger responsibility than any investor pitch. He grew closer to the children. Their birthdays approached, a triple celebration. Daniel hesitated, uncertain how to handle it. Nancy, seeing his genuine desire, invited him to help plan. They agreed to keep it small. A barbecue in Nancy's modest backyard, a handful of the kids' friends. On the day of the party, bright balloons fluttered from the fence. The children, giddy, scurried around, showing Daniel silly games they invented. Nancy grilled hot dogs with friendly neighbors. Daniel's parents came too, meeting their grandchildren for the first time, choking up at the unexpected blessing. It was chaotic, full of shrieking laughter and spilled soda, but it warmed Daniel's heart more than any corporate gala. In one quiet moment, he looked at Nancy across the yard. She caught his eye, smiling softly. No words were needed, just mutual gratitude that they had found a path forward for their family. Still, it wasn't all smooth. The children sometimes grew resentful, especially if Daniel missed a school function or acted uncertain about discipline. There were arguments, tears. Nancy occasionally bristled if Daniel tried to micromanage. "They're not a product launch," she pointed out once, exasperated. They learned to communicate better, addressing each issue with honesty. The kids relaxed as they saw Daniel commit wholeheartedly, stepping up financially without overshadowing Nancy's autonomy. He funded improvements to her home, ensuring the children had comfortable rooms, but did so gently, to not undercut her independence. He discovered the best parenting didn't revolve around throwing money at problems but investing time, empathy, and patience. Months rolled on. Daniel, for the first time in years, felt a sense of inner peace. At an investor meeting, he realized he no longer craved applause or boasted about expansions. Instead, he found himself politely discussing future prospects, then hurrying back to attend the kids' art show. The CFO teased him for being more subdued, but Daniel recognized it as growth, not regression. Even Wright Innovations staff noticed a gentler side to him, with more flexible policies that balanced productivity and well-being. One crisp autumn afternoon, after picking up the kids from an art workshop, Daniel accompanied them to Nancy's place, where they all had dinner together, a casual, warm meal. The children chattered about their day, and Nancy quietly watched Daniel handle their squabbles with a new fatherly grace. After the kids settled in front of a cartoon, Daniel helped Nancy wash dishes. "You're good at this," she teased. "Didn't think you could handle domestic chores." He laughed softly. "I guess I'm learning. I want to be here for them in every way I can." They stood there a moment, recalling how they once shared late-night takeout in his dingy college apartment. The air crackled with nostalgia, yet neither seemed eager to re-spark romance. Their bond now was about co-parenting, mutual respect. Nancy found comfort in seeing Daniel's transformation, but she carried scars from his old single-mindedness. He, too, recognized that while they might never recapture the love from their youth, they had formed something just as valuable, a team built around the well-being of 3 precious lives. And so, Daniel's complicated journey found a new equilibrium. The final piece came on a day when the children's school organized a family day. Each child was allowed to bring parents or guardians to enjoy a morning of picnics, games, and small performances. Daniel initially worried about the stares, the whispers of local parents who had read tabloid headlines. But when he arrived with Nancy and the triplets, he realized the only thing that mattered was the children's beaming faces. They introduced him to teachers, showed him their projects. Nancy set up a quick booth featuring some of her artwork. The kids proudly told their classmates, "That's my mom's painting. And that's my dad, he built cool software." Watching them brag about him, Daniel felt tears threaten. He saw Nancy in the corner of his vision, wiping her eyes discreetly. The sense of having a real family overcame him. No corporate merger, no board meeting, no star-studded wedding could match the deep fulfillment he felt at that moment. He realized he had inadvertently discovered a form of success far more precious than any net worth: love, connection, belonging. Over time, the city's chatter about the infamous wedding scandal died away. Victoria's name faded from Daniel's daily concerns, replaced by schedules of parent-teacher conferences, sports events, and the kids' creative pursuit. He never attempted to date her again, or to rekindle any part of that world. Instead, he refocused on forging deeper ties with the triplets, sometimes coordinating with Nancy to plan small vacations. They took a brief trip to a lakeside cabin that winter, building snowmen and laughing until their sides hurt. The children, wide-eyed at seeing their father so unguarded, asked him questions about his childhood in Riverton. He told them about scraping by, about how he once dreamed of having enough money to never worry again. "But I worried about the wrong things," he admitted gently, ruffling one child's hair. "I forgot to worry about people who matter." At last, Daniel felt truly at home in his own skin. The final 25% of the story was a calmer, more reflective phase, one in which he recognized that the chase for external validation had overshadowed everything else. Now, stepping into fatherhood, partnering with Nancy as co-parents, and letting genuine human connections flourish, these were the real triumph. They didn't happen overnight, nor were they free from challenges, but they were founded on sincerity and love. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.